Wow, I like that.
Insane. It's like next level of coding. I don't think I'm worth it.
Oh my, so easy to use, unbelievably flexible.
Way easier to use than anything I've ever seen.
I love this. This is gonna change AI development forever.
Wow, I like that.
Insane. It's like next level of coding. I don't think I'm worth it.
Oh my, so easy to use, unbelievably flexible.
Way easier to use than anything I've ever seen.
I love this. This is gonna change AI development forever.
Wow, I like that.
Insane. It's like next level of coding. I don't think I'm worth it.
Oh my, so easy to use, unbelievably flexible.
Way easier to use than anything I've ever seen.
I love this. This is gonna change AI development forever.
Hi everyone, welcome to SmythOS 101. Today we're going to teach you how to set up your API call component. So let me just drag and drop this component. Okay, so the API call component is one of the most powerful components in our advanced component library here. So this component will enable you to extend the capabilities of your agent by connecting it to external resources via API. Okay, so let's start with the configurations here. Okay, so we're gonna start from the top down. Okay, just the core configuration. Okay, I'm gonna leave this other two advanced configuration for a later discussion. Okay, so the first thing you need to set up is the method. Okay, when you click this drop down here, you have this list. So the HTTP request method is the way a client, in this case your agent, communicates with the server or the external resource. So for each request method, you need to specify an action, and this is the actions that you can choose from. Okay, so let's go over them really quick. Okay, so the get method, this one, is mostly used for fetching data from an endpoint without altering the data. So I've discussed this very briefly when we talked about API endpoint. Okay, so maybe you just want a list of contacts or a list of blog titles. Okay, so you use the get method to request those stuff. Okay, next is post. Post method is used if you are sending data to be processed by the server. Like for example, when you are creating, let's say, a blog post or a new contact in a database, or in general, you're just creating new resources on a server. So we use the post method for that. Next is put. So put action or request is normally used to update existing data or resource on a server. Okay. Then the next one is patch. So patch is used if you're requesting partial modifications to a resource. So put and patch both deals with resource modification. But the main difference between these two is that put could alter the entire representation of the resource using the data supplied by the client. So it can overwrite current data with new data. So I have here an example. So for instance, this is your existing data. You have this record. You have the email, first name, last name, phone for this person. Okay. Now, if you're gonna send a put request, it might look like this. This is just for demonstration purposes. Okay, so this is how your put request looks like, the body. So you're requesting for to update the data, particularly the email. As you can see, this is a put request just for the email. We didn't include any request for the first name, last name, and phone number, right? It's highly likely that when you do this, you'll overwrite the entire data that you have here, and now it will look like this. So as you can see, everything gets updated. The email gets updated with the new email that you supplied, but the first, last names and the phone number was also updated, but with no data. Alright? So what happens is, in most cases like this, the server interprets the request to update the entire field. Alright? But since you didn't supply, or we didn't supply any data for the other three fields, the server just deleted them. Alright? Because it, what do you call this? It interpreted the request for the entire field, for this entire array object here, to be replaced with just the email. Okay? So when we're doing post requests, it's really important that you be cautious about it, because, you know, again, it can overwrite an entire data. Alright? An entire resource. Now, for the patch request, this is a safer approach if you only want to modify certain sections of a data set. Like, for instance, we're going to do the same request. Alright, let's say this is the existing data, same existing data, and then we're going to do a patch request to update the email. You don't have to include the other fields or properties, just the email. Alright, but when you update it, when you do a patch request, it will only update that email. Right? It will not gonna affect the other data set in your let's say resource or your database. Okay, so between the two, if you're just making partial modifications, it's always recommended to just use patch. If the server provides a way for a user to just do patch request, just go with patch request. Okay. Next is delete. This is pretty straightforward. You use this action if you want to remove a resource from a server. Just if you just want to delete it. Again, use it very cautiously, because when you delete something, you know, it's highly likely that you're gonna be able to restore it. That you're not gonna be able to restore it. Okay, so make sure that when you delete something, you're sure that you need to delete it. Okay, then the last thing is the, oh no, not the last thing, we have the head. Okay, so this is useful if you want to retrieve the metadata of a resource, you know, without actually downloading or fetching the data itself. So for example, you just want to check the size of a list of users, but not the list itself. Okay, you just want to see maybe how many users are there in a table, okay, or a database. So you do a head request, or maybe you just want to check the size of an image, or what's its file type. Okay, so you can do a head HTTP request. Then the other one, last but not least, is the option. So this comes handy if you don't know what HTTP request methods the endpoint supports. Okay, so you can send an options request to the server, and the expected response is a list of methods like maybe guest, post, head, etc. Okay, so all in all, these methods allow clients, again in this case, the agent, to interact with the server resources in a very, very standardized way. So it allows the agent to perform CRUD operations through API. So CRUD, C-R-U-D, stands for create, read, update, and delete operations. Okay? Another thing that everyone needs to remember is that not all servers support all these methods. Okay, it depends on the providers, API provider, and also on the permissions assigned to your role. So the server usually determines if you're allowed to perform CRUD actions or operations by your authorization key. Okay, so that's method. Next is URL. So the URL is the web address used to specify the location of a resource on the server. Okay, so this is the resource the client wants to interact with. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're using the correct URL so your request gets directed to the correct server and endpoint. Okay, so the URL, let me let's an example here. Let me just, okay, so the URL is normally composed of the following. So let's say the first is the protocol. Okay, so the protocol scheme, it could be HTTP or HTTPS. Alright, then it's followed by the domain. It could, example is like this. So it could be a domain, or in some instances it could be a server IP, which is normally used on testing environments. Then after this, we have the path. Okay, sometimes you'll get it like this, /API, and then the endpoint name. Okay, let's say get topics. Alright, it looks like that. So in some instances, you can also include query parameters in the URL. It normally looks like this. Let's say topics, and then this is your query parameter, and then followed by the query data. So let's say topics, anything related to plant, something like this. Okay, so that's a basic URL format. Okay, after this, we have the header section. So this is the header section. So it normally contains key values, key pair values, all right, that is sent together with the request payload to the server. Okay, so these key pair values provide additional information to the server. So two of the most common key pairs you need to supply are the authorization and the content type. Okay, so authorization looks like this. So this is an authentication credential that you need to secure from the API provider. So there are different authentication schemes, but the most common are the bearer and the basic authentications. Okay, so the bearer auth assigns a user a token, to access the protected resources. So it normally looks like this. So you need to specify that it's a bearer authentication key, then followed by the auth token. So again, this will come from your API server provider. Okay. Next is the basic authentication. So this one looks like this, and this usually base 64 encoded string, okay, of the username and the password. Again, this will come from the server, okay, the server API provider. So it's a base 64 encoded. It's a combination of the username and password, okay. So that's basic authentication. So let's say I'm going to do it like that. So that's how, that's what it's going to look like for the header section. Okay, then on some instances, okay, let's go back. I forgot about this. So you don't need the authorization, but you need to specify an API key. So sometimes it looks like this. All right, X API key, and then you need to provide the API key. Okay, so again, it depends on the authentication process implemented by the server API provider or the server API. So yeah, it depends whether you're gonna use authentication or X API key. Depends on the security needed for the resource. So it really depends. Okay. So that's the authorization header. Then another common header key pair value is the content type. You don't need to add it in your headers because we already provide users with a drop down here where anyone can select what content type is needed for the HTTP request. Okay, so for the content type, you just select from the dropdown as I've said. All right, then this lets the server know what media type, what's the media type of the resource, all right, that you're trying maybe to fetch, or the data being sent through the request body. All right, so you can learn more about this in our documentation. And normally, the content type is specified. All right. So this is normally specified in the API reference handbook of the external resource. Okay. So you will know what content type to use for this one or for any request that you need to do. Okay. So, okay, so, what's next? Okay, so, let's, go over some examples, okay? I'm gonna close this one. Alright, so let's say, I'm gonna go over this endpoint. Let's start with this one. Okay, so let's say I want to use this endpoint. I want to call this endpoint on a different agent. Okay, so one thing that I can do is to click the API here on the test domain. Alright, I'm gonna go here. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna call this API endpoint on a different server using an API call component. Okay. So let's do it from scratch. Okay, I'm gonna do this. Okay, so if you go to Swagger, you click this drop down, then just do try it out. And just click try it out, then anything. So remember, if you've watched my previous live learning session, this API endpoint lets users get or fetch any titles. It could be a list, it could be just single title from a list that we provided here. Okay, based on the description that they will provide. So if it matches, if the description they provided matches any of these titles here, we will return that as our response. Okay, that's what we're doing with this endpoint. So we're getting topics to plants or trees. Okay, so I'm gonna execute this one. Okay, so as you can see, this is one way of testing your API call component or your endpoint if it's running correctly. So as you can see, we have a successful query here response, and we get a successful response here. So we have here this and this. Now, if I'm going to translate this into a API call component, this is what I need, this data here. So as you can see, the post method that we did is get. Alright, so I'm going to select get here. Then the URL is this one. So I'm going to copy this URL and put it here. So one thing to note here is that you have here a query query parameter. Okay, so this would look like this. So as you can see, we have here the description. This is the input parameter specified in the endpoint, and then this is the data that the user needs to provide. All right, so I'm gonna add here, I'm gonna call this description as well. It could be anything. All right, what's important is that it's passing the correct value. All right, and then I'm gonna replace this one. I'm gonna highlight, delete, and then replace this with description. So what's gonna happen now is that I have a query parameter called description, and then this data is gonna be coming from the input variable here that we added in this API call component. Alright, so you have here your scheme protocol, HTTPS, you have your domain. So this is supplied by SmythOS for testing purposes. So you might want to deploy your agent into production and supply your own subdomain later on. Then you have here the path, you have API, and then you have the actual endpoint name. Okay, followed by the query parameter. Now, if you go back to Swagger, you'll see in the header we need to add this section called accept. So accept lets the user or the server, it tells the client that this is the accepted format by the server. Okay, so we're gonna add accept, and then it says text plain. Okay, and then we don't need to specify the content type. We don't need to specify the body because we're gonna pass the query value to the URL. Okay, so now you can save this. Alright, let's just open it again. I'm gonna do debug, and then I'm gonna say anything related to, let's look at the list. Maybe let's try to change the transportation. Let's say transportation. Okay, it's a successful request. When you go to your response here, you will see that it returned this value. Okay, now again, we can also, if you're gonna use the data for other post-processing stuff in your workflow, you can create custom output. Let's try to do it. So apply what we learned in our previous sessions. I'm gonna add a note here so I can save my, okay, so I'm gonna stop. Then let's create a custom output. So the output is being tunneled through the response output here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do response dot, and then let's say I want to get the titles here. Okay, so the titles key property, its value is within the reply array object here, which is within the result array object. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna type result here, and then reply, and then titles. Okay, if you just want to be again fancy, you can just put it here and then just put titles here. Okay, now let's try to run this and see if it's gonna work. Okay, now you have your custom output and the title in this is being mapped or channeled to this custom output. Alright, so that's how you do, that's how you set up an API call component. And in this example, just to recap, we tried to call this agent endpoint. So that's one really nice thing about SmythOS is that we allow users to use these functionalities as individual endpoints. So this becomes available not just for this agent but for other agents as well. Alright, so if you want to use, like, you think you have a use case for this endpoint on a different agent that you're working or building, you can always use this endpoint, alright, via the API call component like this. Okay, now here's another example of, let's say I'm gonna create, so I have here a database. I built this on Airtable. Alright, so I wanna send, like, let's say I wanna create contacts here. So I'm gonna do an API call for creating contacts. So this is how it's gonna look like. So I'm gonna do a post request. Alright, and I'm gonna supply the proper URL here. So this is for Airtable. And then as you can see here in the path, I need to specify the base ID and the table ID. But I'm using variables here. So these variables are saved in my agent variables here. Okay, so this is the base ID and this is the table ID. So this is important if there are variables that you think you'll need or reuse again within the workflow, but you want it to be exclusive within the agent only. Alright? If you want to make this available to other agents in the future, you need to save it in the vault. Okay, so it becomes global. We're gonna have a separate discussion about it. Okay, so I have here the base ID and my table ID. I'm supplying them using my agent variables here. Alright, then the header here, as you can see, Airtable requires us to pass a barrier authentication credential. Alright, so the auth key is also saved in my agent variables here. Again, this is my an option if you just wanna make the variables or the authentication key available to a specific agent only. Okay, so that's my authentication key. Then application type or content type, sorry, is application JSON. Again, this is set by this is a requirement from the API provider, which is Airtable. Then this is the body. Again, this is set by the API or the server provider. Alright, so I need to pass this information as a fields array object. So the email, first name, last name, and phone number. As you can see, I supplied each value with a variable. So this data will later be replaced by the data, or rather this variable will be replaced by the actual data that we will pass through these input parameters. Okay, so when you're replacing information where you're adding variable data, make sure that you're adding them from here. You just have to click this, like I'm gonna delete this, right? I'm just gonna click email here and it's gonna be supplied automatically. Alright, now if we're gonna test this one, let's say shell at SmythOS.com, then phone number, alright, and then I'm gonna click next, and the response. Okay, so I get an ID and some other information here confirming that the fields have been updated with this information. So if I'm gonna go to my data here, okay, you can see I was able to create the contacts. Alright, so this is just an example. Then another one is this. Oh, it's the same. So it's another Airtable. Okay, so this is just an example. Now let's say you are working on Postman. Okay, so Postman is a tool for testing APIs. Okay, so let's say you are testing everything here, and you want to bring this APIs into your agent, add them as API calls. Alright, so one way to do it is to manually copy and paste everything, but then we also have the option to import these collections, Postman collections, into your builder, SmythOS agent builder. So what you need to do is go to your Postman collection, click this ellipsis here, and then select export. Make sure that you select collection version 2.1 and then just click export. Alright. After clicking export, you can then save it in a folder of your choosing. I already have this 2 collections downloaded and exported, so I'm just gonna forgo this one. Okay. Now once you have everything exported, the next thing to do is to import it into your agent builder. So what you need to do is go to your JSON file, the collection, alright, and then just drag and drop them into the builder. Let's go with the Airtable. I'm gonna drag and drop it here, and then you're gonna get this pop-up here. Then just click yes to import. So as you can see, it automatically created an API call component. Alright, it's very MVP at the moment, so you might still need to tweak this. For instance, it didn't it's not gonna import or it's not gonna create input parameters for you. Okay, so this is how it's gonna look like. Okay, so you have the method, the URL, then the header. You might wanna update this. Again, we don't need the content type here, so you can delete this and then just add, yeah, it's already added here. And then the body, you might wanna update this, maybe beautify this one. So just click enter, enter. Okay, and then let me just clean this up a bit. Okay, now as you can see, I've uploaded everything. I just need to add my input parameters here. I'm gonna add my email, my first name parameter, last name, and then phone. Okay, then I'm gonna add the variables here. So email, I'm gonna add this, then I'm gonna add first name, and then phone. So again, this is an MVP release, but still truly helpful. It will save you a lot of time if you have like a huge JSON data structure that you need to pass to the server. And, you know, you don't have to manually add them here. So it's basically the same thing here. I'm gonna save this, alright, and then I'm just gonna do the same thing. Let's say I'm gonna shell add info.go. Let's say shell add for this, then next step. So it's still a successful request. So if I'm gonna go to my, so you see that it's been added here. So that's how you import and you export and import a Postman collection into your agent builder, like after testing on Postman. Okay, so alright, yeah, and that's the API call component. Really powerful. It will allow your agent to fetch data or to upload data or to create new data on different databases. And yeah, okay, let me know if you have questions. Feel free to message us, alright, if you have clarifications or there are things that you think we should go over again. But I hope this lesson helps you learn how to set up your call API component. Have a great day.